New York Times article wrote about dirty hippies and the problems there. Others pointed out that the Monterey Pop Festival of 1967 was probably better music, and that what made Woodstock really famous was not only the large numbers of people, but the fact that it took place in New York, near the media centers, and it was the Woodstock film and Woodstock records, and there were many, many other festivals during the 60s. I myself ran a number of them in Los Angeles, and we had as many as 30,000 people in some of them, not bands as famous as those at Woodstock, although the Mothers of Invention appeared first on the stage that I provided for them. So the general sense of the LA Times, the New York Times article, I keep on saying LA Times, was that Woodstock it gave a sense to an era. It gave, but it had a lot of, but I have, and one of the comments was, it was proof that we were not alone. And that's very important, because all of us live inside of our little bodies and we're isolated from one another, and the sense that 500,000 people shared these values and ideals was significant. But Woodstock came at the end of the 60s, and in a certain sense it was the beginning of the 70s. There have been continuations of Woodstock. Burning Man, for example, which is a festival of 35,000 people that takes place every year, that exhibits the same spirit. And that's what Woodstock really, and the 60s really established, was there were social changes. There were changes in people's consciousness. People became more conscious about the need to have, to stop the discrimination against blacks and women. And in the free press, one of the things I did during the 60s was to chronicle the emergence of these different movements, student movements, women's movements, black movements, and let them see themselves, and to bring one movement in touch with another movement and bring about a sense of a common spirit. But one of the things that I complained about during the 60s, and in looking at Woodstock now, that it changed the world, but it didn't change institutions. One of the things the Free Press helped do was help form the Peace and Freedom Party. I'll tell you a little episode about that just to give you a sense of the period. Peace and Freedom Party was formed by some radicals, and today it's a Socialist Party, and it was formed as a Socialist Party. And when they first formed and were looking to get signatures to go on the ballot, they decided they were going to have a conference after they got on the ballot. And I strongly objected to that procedure, and I wrote a personal editorial saying that I wasn't going to support anybody who was looking for support before they announced their platform. A week before the signature drive was to end, and the Peace and Freedom Party was doing quite badly, as a matter of fact, the American Independent Party, George Wallace's party, a right-wing group, got on the ballot, and I wrote an editorial, again a personal editorial, saying I changed my mind, that if the American Independent Party was on the ballot, I felt it needed to be balanced, even if I didn't agree with what it was being balanced with. And that last week, the Peace and Freedom Party got an enormous number of votes, a number of signatures. And after they were on the ballot, Alan Watts, the famous Zen philosopher, wrote me a letter. And he said, I never voted in an election before, but when I read your editorials and how you changed your mind in public and decided that we needed more balance, I, for the first time, registered and voted for the Peace and Freedom Party. And so that was, they give you a kind of picture of what the Free Press was doing at that time. But for all the good that Woodstock did, and for all the inspiration that it gave to people, nothing changed. And as a matter of fact, the Reagan years were probably a response against what was going on in the 60s and against phenomena like Woodstock. So in a certain sense, Woodstock in the 60s brought about a period of many years of conservative domination of politics in the country. And that's something that I strongly regret, because I think that the task of the 60s and of the people in the 60s, if they wanted to make those values endure, was to develop institutions that would preserve. Instead, we were out, and Abby Hoffman was out levitating the Pentagon and carrying on all kinds of public promotional things that didn't have an effect, a permanent effect on society, except that groups like this and a whole group of people, probably 20% of the American population, that's now identified as the cultural creatives, came out of the 60s and are inspired, but were not large enough to make the kind of institutional changes that I'd like to see. And frankly, I don't know what they should be. And what I'm doing is kind of talking out in public and asking people to advise me what we should be doing on the political front. Personally, I think that the election of a president like Obama was a direct flow from Woodstock and the 60s and the whole years of the Bush administration. But to me, Obama doesn't go far enough. He surrounded himself with the very people who put us into this economic crisis, and he is going along with simply a program of government intervention that can be very bad for the people, can establish some very bad precedents, and can result in the eroding of American freedom, even while Obama is speaking about American freedom. So I don't know what to do, but I'll tell you a little story. I was thinking about this problem, and I was thinking about how the American people don't seem to be, that the spirit of the 60s certainly doesn't pervade all the United States. It pervades a certain section, perhaps it's 20% of the cultural creatives. So I was sitting at the computer a couple of weeks ago, and I was thinking, well, if I were going to form a political party, what would I call it? What would be a name that would both attract large numbers of people and would have the values of the 60s? And I came across, and I came up with the name American Freedom Party. So I look on the internet, and sure enough, there is a domain name. It wasn't really a domain name, but a group of students in Tennessee had put out a blog called the American Freedom Party. And then I looked at what they had done, and they hadn't registered a domain name. They hadn't made a URL. So I immediately went to the internet, and for $8.50, I'm now the owner of the name American Freedom Party. And then I began to look around some more, and I was thinking, well, Los Angeles Free Press, that is too provincial a name for what really needs to be done in this country right now. So I came up with the name American Free Press.
Yes.
I looked on the internet, and nobody had registered that domain name.